Kale fumbled with the strap of his bag as the shuttle doors hissed open, spilling him into the chaos of the celestial crossport. He hated the spaceport. Not because it was dangerous, though rogue gravdrifts and caffeinated drone swarms made it so, but because it demanded a social performance he had never quite mastered. People bustled past him, dragging wheeled cases that hummed suspiciously, and merchants shouted over the clanging announcements of incoming ships, their voices pitched somewhere between enthusiasm and actual alarm. Kale adjusted his tunic for the third time, muttering under his breath, "Maybe if I just blend into a corner, no one will notice me." Of course, corners were hard to find when every flat surface was covered with someone selling galactic fruit, holographic souvenirs, or worst of all, mechanical pets with zero sense of personal space. He had one goal today: deliver the gift. It was small, a delicate cylinder no bigger than his palm, wrapped in shimmering material that refracted the neon lights into 1,000 tiny stars. He had built it himself, a device to record and project patterns of starlight, and to him, it represented more than craftsmanship. It was a gesture, a bridge between worlds, and an opportunity to finally talk to Leora without tripping over his words. Leora, the alien girl whose presence seemed to tilt the air around her. She looked like a human, but not entirely. Her long ears, elegant and expressive, twitched whenever she felt amused, curious, or mildly irritated. They were subtle indicators of emotion, though Kale had learned the hard way that misreading a twitch could result in anything from embarrassment to mild humiliation. She had that kind of attention to detail that made him feel like he was constantly auditioning for a role he didn't even know existed. Kale approached the vendor-lined corridor, scanning the crowd. Leora was there, of course, leaning against a levitating cart stacked with glimmering containers that promised exotic substances from across the sector. She was wearing one of her usual tunics, something that shimmered faintly with shifting colors, enough to remind him that she was from a place that considered fabric science as art. Her green eyes caught his immediately, and Kale froze. He reminded himself to breathe. He did, awkwardly, like a man practicing yoga in zero gravity. Leora's long ears twitched, and Kale knew from weeks of studying her subtle expressions that she had noticed him. Whether she was amused, irritated, or merely curious was impossible to tell. Probably amused. That always seemed to be the default when Kale was involved. "Kale," she said, her voice carrying across the market with a tone that could have been mistaken for accusation if not for the tiny, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corners of her lips. Hello," he said, trying to sound casual while simultaneously imagining every possible way he could trip over his own feet. "I brought something for you." The words sounded like gravel falling into a vacuum, but he forged ahead, holding out the small cylinder like it was a peace offering to some intergalactic deity. Leora raised an eyebrow, the kind of subtle arch that could either mean interest or impending doom. "For me?" she asked, a faint note of suspicion threading through her tone. "Is it dangerous?" "No," Kale said quickly. "Well, not in any usual sense. It's a starlight projector. I made it." He wanted to add that he had calibrated it to recognize the unique signature of the crossport's orbiting moons, but the words jammed somewhere in his throat. Instead, he offered a clumsy smile. "I thought maybe you'd like it." Leora took the device, her long fingers surprisingly delicate as they closed around it. She tilted her head, her ears flicking like sails catching a subtle wind. "You made this?" she asked. There was a pause as she examined it, turning it over in her hands, her gaze sharp enough to make Kale feel like he was undergoing a full system scan. "You must be the last warrior who knows this." Her words fell on him like a meteor striking a quiet planet, a mixture of awe and disbelief that made his chest tighten. "Wait," he said, stepping closer before realizing that he might have just invaded her personal space. She didn't have a personal space field, but Kale wasn't entirely sure if one existed for humans in her presence. "The last warrior, I don't." Leora smiled, and it was the first time Kale noticed that it wasn't just the curve of her lips, but the entire subtle orchestration of her expression. The flick of her ears, the tilt of her head, the small lift of her chin, all harmonizing to create a moment that was simultaneously intimidating and exhilarating. "Not many humans would understand the calibration," she said, almost conversationally, like she was discussing the merits of a spice rather than the preservation of forbidden star knowledge. "Most would break it in a day, or worse, try to sell it to the wrong faction." Kale blinked. Break it, sell it, okay, that's reassuring. He realized he had said it out loud, and Leora's laughter, light, musical, and slightly teasing, hit him like a warm solar flare. He wanted to disappear behind a crate, but the laughter carried on, scattering through the corridor like a gentle storm. You have no idea what you're holding, Leora said, still laughing. She tapped the projector, and the device responded, flickering to life as a cascade of tiny stars erupted from its surface, mapping themselves across the metal panels above the market. The vendors groaned, and Kale winced as a stray spark of holographic light danced across a passerby's hat, making it look like the poor soul had a miniature galaxy orbiting their head. Leora's ears twitched again, the subtle movements betraying amusement at his panicked expression. Sorry, Kale said, bowing slightly as if the universe required formal apologies for minor interstellar incidents. The rogue AI cat from the previous market days would have been proud, well, impressed by his awkward charm at least. Leora shook her head, still smiling, and handed the device back. No, it's perfect, you didn't just make a gift. You've made a bridge. Kale's stomach flipped at her words. A bridge? He asked, cautiously optimistic that he wasn't about to be vaporized for poetic exaggeration. Leora's eyes softened, her ears tilting in an almost conspiratorial angle. Between us, between your world and mine, most humans never even try to see what lies beyond the obvious. But you, she tapped the device again, the starlight spilling out in intricate loops and constellations. You understood it without even knowing all the rules. Kale tried to smile, but it came out somewhere between a grimace and a grim acknowledgement of his own miraculous luck. So you're saying I'm special? Dangerously competent, Leora said, her tone teasing. And apparently foolish enough to give away star secrets to the wrong people, but charmingly foolish, that counts for something. She flicked a tiny switch on the device, and the starlight began forming patterns that looked suspiciously like cartoonish alien faces, one of them sticking out its tongue at Kale. He laughed despite himself because it was impossible not to. The market around them continued in chaos, nanobot glitter floating lazily through the air, vendors yelling at their floating displays, and grav drones weaving between bodies like oversized mechanical hummingbirds. Kale looked at Leora and realized in that absurdly vivid moment that the universe was less frightening with her laughter echoing beside him. He still had no idea what secrets she carried, no idea what the device truly meant in the grand scheme of things, but for the first time, he felt a kind of reckless, exhilarating optimism. Somewhere between the danger and the absurdity of it all, he had managed to do something right. And maybe, just maybe, that was the start of something extraordinary. Kale followed Leora through the twisting corridors of the crossport, his steps careful because he had yet to master the zero-grav tiles that occasionally flipped a foot into the air for no discernible reason. Leora moved with the grace of someone who had never tripped over a stray grav drone or accidentally sprayed nanoglitter across an entire vendor alley, her long ears flicking rhythmically as if they were little radar dishes tuned to the absurdities of the universe. You do realize, Kale said, ducking under a floating cart selling synthetic fruit that smelled faintly of sulfur and vanilla, that every time we do this, I'm contributing to the official chaos quota of the spaceport. Leora glanced back over her shoulder, her green eyes glinting with amusement. Oh, don't worry, the chaos quota resets every cycle. And besides, she added, tapping one of her ears in what Kale had learned was a signal for playful teasing, I enjoy watching humans try to survive with dignity. Kale tried to hide a wince. Dignity had been severely compromised the moment he'd tripped over the edge of the market platform and ended up dangling from a gravlift cable, waving awkwardly at a group of amused traders. I'll have you know, he said, puffing his chest, I am a warrior. I've faced rogue star pirates, vacuum anomalies, and slightly aggressive space hamsters. This is a tactical misstep. Leora snorted, a sound that made his heart do that peculiar human thing where it felt too big for its cage. Tactical misstep, she repeated, amusement curling her words like smoke. You fell off a ledge. You weren't exactly defending the galaxy from evil. Kale opened his mouth, ready to launch into a long defense, but the words tangled themselves into something halfway between a groan and a squeak. He settled for muttering, well, someone has to test the structural integrity of the gravlifts. It's a vital role. Leora's laughter followed them down the corridor as they entered a quieter sector of the port, One of those areas where the walls themselves seemed to hum with residual energy from forgotten experiments and abandoned star mapping arrays. Here, she began to explain more about why Kale's gift, the starlight projector, was far more significant than he realized. You see, she said, kneeling to adjust the projector so it hovered level with her palms, most humans don't even recognize the patterns of subspace flux. You've not only recognized them, you've manipulated them into something coherent. That's rare. She paused, her ears twitching as if listening for Kale's reaction before he could respond. Or dangerous, depends on your perspective. Kale squinted at the device, pretending to understand what she meant. Subspace flux manipulation, he said, repeating her words like a student trying to sound scholarly. Got it. So I've accidentally discovered an ancient alien superpower while trying to make a gift. That sounds responsible. Leora's ears twitched sharply, which Kale interpreted as a sign that she was suppressing laughter. Accidental or not, it's significant. There are protocols, Kale, rules humans weren't meant to know, and yet here you are. Kale scratched the back of his neck, the way humans often did when feeling slightly inadequate or profoundly confused. I'm a warrior, he said again, as if repeating it enough would make the universe believe it. I survive, I fight, I occasionally trip over my own ego or grav lifts. Leora tilted her head, the movement graceful and deliberately dramatic. You're the kind of warrior who makes mistakes with charm, she said. Rare, dangerously so. She tapped the projector, and for a moment it cast star patterns that resembled comically angry faces, one of which had a tiny holographic tongue sticking out. Kale laughed despite himself, partly because of the absurdity and partly because she seemed to delight in it. You know, he said, leaning back against a softly humming wall, if I survive this day, it's only because I have a talent for entertaining aliens. You mean humans, Leora corrected, though her tone suggested amusement more than scolding. We enjoy your brand of chaos. Most humans are too polite, too predictable. You break patterns. Kale felt a flicker of pride, brief but there. Breaking patterns, he said slowly, testing the phrase like a new weapon, is my specialty. She laughed again, and then her expression softened, a subtle shift that made him want to freeze in place. It's not just the chaos, she said. It's that you care. Most humans wouldn't think of calibrating a device to reflect the unique stellar alignments of this sector. They wouldn't notice. Her ears twitched as she studied him, and Kale had the distinct impression she was seeing into corners of his mind he didn't even know existed. The conversation was interrupted by a minor emergency. A grav drone had decided that Kale's feet were the perfect launching pad for its programmed aerobatics. He waved his arms, tripping over thin air and narrowly avoiding colliding with a vending unit selling genetically engineered pastries that squeaked when bitten. Leora merely sighed, exasperated, her ears tilting in what Kale had come to recognize as the universal sign for humans are ridiculous. Do you always create this much chaos when you walk? She asked, though her tone was more amused than accusatory. Only on days ending with Y, Kale replied promptly, earning a short laugh that made his chest warm. In every third gravlift mishap, he added with mock seriousness. Leora shook her head, her hair catching a faint bioluminescent glow from the walls. You really are hopeless, she said, but there was no bite in her words. Yet somehow capable. Kale glanced down at the projector, now flickering gently as if in agreement. I'm glad you think so, he said, the words catching on the edge of something almost hopeful. He realized that in all his clumsy heroics, he had finally found someone who could see both his failures and his intentions, and not just laugh at them but appreciate them. The rest of the afternoon unfolded in a series of small adventures. They navigated through a section of the port that hummed with experimental propulsion fields, inadvertently igniting a few harmless, but visually spectacular, plasma sparks. A security drone, apparently offended by Kale's unintentional interference with its navigation lights, chased them briefly before realizing that Leora's presence trumped protocol. At one point, Kale nearly tripped over a sentient luggage sphere that refused to move out of the way, and Leora's amusement was so palpable that he almost wished the sphere would chase him further, just to see her laugh again. By the time they found a quiet observation deck overlooking the port, Kale realized that the universe felt both infinitely large and strangely intimate. Leora leaned against the railing, ears twitching, eyes fixed on the glimmering traffic of ships above. You know, she said softly, you've made this more than a gift, you've made a story and perhaps a beginning. Hale felt a thrill at her words, though he had no idea what the end of that story would be. He glanced at the projector, still softly projecting starlight patterns that looked suspiciously like tiny aliens waving at him, and realized that even in a chaotic, unpredictable universe, he had somehow managed to do something right. Humor, chaos, curiosity, and a small device of his own making had built a fragile bridge between two worlds and between him and Leora. He smiled, awkward, hopeful, and entirely human, knowing that whatever came next, he would face it beside someone who found him ridiculous, remarkable, and most importantly, worth noticing. Hale and Leora slipped through the labyrinthine corridors of the crossport like two misfit dancers, their movements a chaotic ballet of narrowly avoided collisions and spontaneous laughter. The starlight projector floated between them, casting delicate constellations that shifted to match the rhythm of their conversation, or perhaps the rhythm of Kale's increasingly panicked steps. Are you sure this is the right way? Kale asked, dodging a small, wheeled security drone that zoomed past him like it had a personal vendetta. Absolutely, Leora said, her long ears flicking with amusement. If it weren't, we'd be trapped in a vendor maze selling sentient fruit that insults your tactical competence. Hale swerved to avoid an anthropomorphic melon that had shouted something in a dialect he didn't understand. Then we'd starve, he muttered, because I wouldn't be able to negotiate with sarcasm. You'd manage, Leora replied, a teasing smile curling on her lips. Eventually. The reason for their frantic navigation was clear. The starlight projector had unlocked a hidden subspace archive buried beneath the crossport itself, a repository of knowledge that Leora's civilization had thought lost to the ages. This archive contained information about starforging engines, ancient interstellar routes, and cryptic philosophical musings that only made sense if you were willing to question reality itself, or Kale, apparently. You know, Kale said as they slid under a low-hanging conduit, I thought today would involve at least one plasma mishap. Somehow we've upgraded to interdimensional star archives. Leora chuckled, her ears twitching like delicate antennas. Interdimensional, yes, dangerous, yes, and humorous, hopefully. I thought the universe could use some levity along with the apocalypse. Kale stopped for a breath, trying not to hyperventilate as the walls around them hummed with latent energy. Levity, he echoed. I'm your levity guy. Chaos, mild peril, accidental explosions, I've got it covered. They reached the heart of the archive, a chamber suspended in anti-gravity fields where holographic projections of alien constellations and technological schematics floated like fish in a cosmic aquarium. Kale felt a rush of awe. The scale of knowledge here was staggering, yet it didn't intimidate him as much as he expected. Perhaps because Leora was beside him, guiding him through each floating diagram with a mixture of patience and amusement. You realize, she said, tapping a floating hologram that shimmered with blue circuitry, that most humans would look at this and panic, or sell it to a galactic collector without understanding a thing. Kale held up the projector, which now pulsed with starlight that perfectly mirrored the archive's schematics. I don't panic, he said with mock solemnity. I sort of improvise and occasionally trip. Her laugh echoed softly in the chamber, and Kale realized how much he had come to rely on her presence, how her subtle guidance had transformed what could have been a terrifying ordeal into an adventure that made him feel alive in ways he had never expected. You've done something extraordinary, Leora said, her voice dropping to a softer, more earnest tone. By understanding this device, you've reopened a channel to knowledge my people thought was sealed forever. You've bridged a gap between our worlds. Kale blinked, unsure whether to feel proud or terrified. Bridged a gap, huh? He paused, glancing at the holograms. So, I'm not just the guy who trips over gravlifts and annoys you with sarcasm. You're much more than that, she said. You've proven that thoughtfulness and curiosity matter, that the right intentions can navigate even the most chaotic of universes. That's rare. Before Kale could reply, the archive system stirred unexpectedly, reacting to the starlight projector as though it recognized a kindred intellect. Holographic panels shifted, revealing a hidden compartment that contained a small crystal sphere pulsing with soft, internal light. Leora's eyes widened. That, she said, voice low, is the key to the starforging engine schematics. No human or alien has held it in centuries. Hale held out a hand, hesitating. You mean this is dangerous? Possibly, she said, ears flicking in warning. Or transformative, depends on your perspective. Hale smiled a little crookedly. I think I'm leaning toward transformative. Danger seems manageable with your guidance. They shared a quiet laugh, a moment of levity in the midst of interstellar revelation. Hale realized that the awkward, bumbling human he had always thought himself to be had changed. He was still prone to chaos, still prone to mistakes, but he had grown capable of understanding something far beyond himself, something that connected him to a larger cosmos. He had learned to trust his instincts, his creativity, and the guidance of someone who saw potential where others might only see folly. With careful movements, they integrated the crystal sphere into the projector, causing a cascade of holographic starlight to sweep across the chamber in magnificent arcs. Hale marveled as constellations shifted into diagrams, equations, and maps, all coherent, all meaningful. Leora's ears twitched, a sign of quiet satisfaction. You did this, she said almost reverently. You didn't just follow instructions, you improvised, adapted, and succeeded. Hale glanced at her, and for a moment, all the humor and chaos of their journey coalesced into something profound. I still trip a lot, he said with a sheepish grin. And yet, she said softly, you've made history. They lingered in the archive, watching the stars, both real and projected, dance across the chamber, sharing quiet jokes about rogue drones, sentient pastries, and the absurdity of gravlifts that never quite obeyed gravity. The universe stretched vast and mysterious before them, but for the first time, Hale felt both capable and connected, his small, thoughtful actions having reverberated across worlds. When they finally left the archive, stepping back into the chaotic corridors of the crossport, the hum of the station felt warmer, less threatening. Hale realized that he had changed. He was no longer just a cautious, awkward human trying to survive. He was a bridge, a link between knowledge, worlds, and hearts. And beside him, Leora walked with the same subtle grace, her long ears flicking in